I mean, you grew up under considerable racism and it was institutionalised. But that Australia has evolved since those bad days, and whatever racism you endured, you were still able to see the goodness in Australia. I mean, you're as patriotic as the next bloke. I mean, how were you able to see the goodness in Australia when overpaid modern sports stars can't?
Well, that's one of the bizarre things, because you can imagine what my parents went through, and then my grandparents and great-grandparents went through during that period. What they taught us growing up was, don't be a victim. Take control of your life, take responsibility for what you can achieve in life, try and get as best education as you could, and get a job and provide money back into your family. Even if you got less pay than the worker next to you, you still worked, and you still worked hard. And I grew up, with uncles and aunties and grandparents and parents and that, who worked really hard. They worked in cattle stations, because that's where I lived in north of New South Wales, with large cattle areas and that. And you can imagine people around 1900 into the early 50s that worked pretty hard, no matter what, black, white, or brindle, on cattle stations. And they did, and they worked very hard, but they also took pride in what they were doing. I see photos of my father, and they slept in humpies. My grandparents and that, and yet they'd get up and they'd have a suit on to go to church, and it was pressed. I don't know how they did it, actually. You had them pressed and clean, and shoes, and my dad, being a bit of a dapper bloke, as you can tell looking at me, that I've looked like him as well. He had his hat on and everything, and he looked fantastic. And they were always polite. They always worked hard, and they took up challenges. Like my mother, her grandfather was Irish, and he married an Aboriginal woman back in the 1860s, and she wanted us to have access to education. So our education was through the Catholic school system, and I remember when they didn't have a high school in our area, my parents rallied a number of other people and talked the local Catholic girls' high school into accepting boys. Much to the pleasure of my older brothers, but it was, this is the type of people they were. And I really, get so much pride in me, because every now and again, like I go home to Grafton and up through that Bayougal Clarence River area, and old people come out and said, "Oh, we heard that you're Roy and Dolly Mundine's son," and I said, "Yeah, that's right." And they talk about how wonderful they were. Wow. And how hardworking and stuff. And so they believed that you just determined your life, no matter what. And I remember some of the funny stories, like the welfare officer come around to check our house out. And my mum got the broom and chased him, and he never come back. And so it's about that strength, even though we were living in a segregated.
Well, speaking of that strength,
very much
Warren,
systematic.